Hi everyone and welcome. You're here today with Auntie Valkyrie Divine and we're continuing our series. So today is day 2 of the Sacral Chakra, and today we're going to be talking about what happens when this chakra is out of balance. So yesterday we addressed the foundations, the introduction to the chakra, what are some of its characteristics, and today we're going to be talking about how can you tell if this chakra is out of balance, are there any blockages. Remember we talked about a chakra being deficient or excessive, so we're going to be addressing those things. Again, I didn't have anything orange to emphasize the color, so I just put a little flower there to just remind you that the color is orange, and anything orange will help. Again, tomorrow we'll address what helps to balance the chakra. So I'm going to get started. I have the attention span of a pea today, so please bear with me if I'm reading a little bit more than usual. It's just been a very interesting day. So we'll get started. So we talked about this chakra being a center of emotions. Yes, it's the seat of emotionality, of duality. We talked about that, of sensuality, sexuality, pleasure, pain. Right? We talked about the two different extremities of what emotions are all about. We talked about creativity. So these are all aspects of the chakra, and when the chakra is out of balance, a lot of things can happen. So first of all, if we start with the idea of emotions, so what's going to happen is if you have blocked emotions, by default you're going to be in a very repressive environment, right? So what's happening is, when we're talking about the flow, you're not really letting the flow of energy go up through the second chakra. And so when you're repressing things, remember I was talking about yesterday, when you're feeling pain, if you're on the negative end of the spectrum emotionally, you tend to contract and withdraw, and that brings you back down towards the root chakra. Because you're feeling threatened, you're feeling fear. And so what ends up happening is that upward motion is not happening. So it's not really, the energy is not flowing upwards is the idea here. And blocking your emotions can be good in some ways, I suppose, because you don't have to deal with them, but there's a lot of repercussions that follow after. So in order for things to flow in the second chakra, we need to do that emotional work, and it's understandable that the emotional work is not pleasurable, typically, right? There's a lot of anytime we have to deal with emotions, it's a complex thing, right? There's a lot of variables involved that it brings up. It stirs up a lot of things, and people aren't always ready to deal with that, right? We don't always have the coping ability that we need, that we want to have in order to deal with these things, but we have to face those. And what ends up happening is, again, at this level, if we try to work things up too quickly, or we say, okay, I'm going to deal with that, and we're not ready, then what ends up happening is, again, we just block it, and we say, no, I can't deal with that, and we just repress it back to the root chakra, right? So again, we're thinking about, oh, this is bringing up pain, I'm feeling vulnerable, I'm feeling threatened, and right away, as soon as you see the word threat, you're talking about fight or flight, and that's the root chakra, so the energy is going back, you're contracting your energy, so it's not expanding up. I'm going to read a little something here because I think it's really, really interesting. So it says, once we express and release emotions, the body's energy is no longer fixated or contracted around that pain and can expand again into a state of pleasure. So that's one of the things where, when we can remove the pain, it increases the capacity for pleasure. But a lot of the times, in this chakra, people experience these kinds of blockages because they're just not able to move up and bring that energy upwards. And one of the things that we have to think of is that this chakra has to do a lot with the right to feel, right? So tomorrow I'm going to talk a little bit more about what can you do to reclaim that right to feel, right? So that's the inherent vibration of the sacral chakra, and you know, blocking emotions, blocking your feelings is not something that is conducive to the energy moving upwards and to there being that flow that we're talking about. And literally this chakra is all about flow, about movement, about fluidity, right? So if we're going to move on and talk a little bit about when the chakra is deficient, so what, you know, how does that manifest? So the first thing is there's a huge fear of change that comes in. This touches a little bit on the root, and I'll explain why in a minute, but it's fear of change from a different perspective. So what happens is because you lack that flow, so if you're blocking things, again, I know I'm repeating myself over and over again, but it's very important that you understand that we're trying all the time to bring our vibration higher, to a higher level. We're always trying to move up from, you know, from a condensed state of matter upwards into lighter states of being and feeling. And when you're resisting that fluidity, again, you're just going back to the structural aspect of the root chakra, which is okay. You know, like I said, sometimes we're just not ready to move up, and that's perfectly fine. But you know, these are the fundamental chakras to start with in order to bring that process up. And so a lot of the times people will experience, because of these blocked emotions and fear of change and of moving forward and resisting this fluidity, they'll experience what's called, you know, being flat emotionally. So kind of like an emotional dummy or numb emotionally, and you don't have that wide range of feelings because you're too scared to feel. Feeling, yes, it can bring you in you know, great highs, but a lot of the times it brings you into abysmal lows, and we don't like that. It's very hard to deal with that, right? So a lot of people tend to try to just numb it out and be at this kind of constant flat line in order to not have to deal with their emotions. You know, and another thing that we are touching on here is that if we're talking about emotions, if we're talking about feelings, you know, if you're not expressing that, so again, this is a center of creativity, right, and expression, and you can be creative in a lot of ways, but you know, creativity at its most divine has to do with, you know, with creating life, right? We're talking about sexuality again. You know, it's by engaging in these acts with someone that we love that we end up creating life. And that is the highest form of creativity that there is out there, you know. And so if we're touching on this subject, one of the ways in which this deficiency can manifest itself is if you're avoiding pleasure. So a lot of the times when people have imbalances in their sacral chakra, they don't feel good about sex. They don't feel good about you know, doing things out of pleasure. They feel like that's not right, like that's something that is not supposed to happen. You know, it could also be a lack of sensuality. They just cannot be sensual. They cannot be sexual. They don't have that passion in them. Or, you know, the act of sex is absolutely meaningless. They don't really get any enjoyment out of it. So they might go through it, but they don't really feel anything out of it, right? Again, because those emotions are blocked, and there's no flow. There's no allowing yourself that right to feel the pleasure, right? So let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, some might scoff at pleasure at being sort of like a distraction from doing real work, you know, when you're saying, oh, I don't have time for that, you know, you're distracting me from my work, or, you know, you're trying to think of sex and of enjoyment and through that venue as something that is a distraction to what you're really supposed to be doing, or to true work, so to speak. And you fear and reject that, so you're avoiding pleasure out of guilt or out of shame. So remember, we were talking about what feeling is associated with the root when we're talking about what's blocking the root chakra from expressing itself, and that was fear. So at the level of the sacral chakra, if we move up a little bit, there's two feelings associated. The typical one that is you know, you'll find through the literature is guilt. And very closely behind guilt is shame. So we feel guilty for feeling pleasure, and then sometimes we feel like we don't deserve pleasure, and so we feel guilty if we engage in an act of pleasure, whether it be, and again, it doesn't have to be sexual. Yes, this is the seed of sexuality, but, and emotions, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. So, again, so you're feeling shameful. People, there's a lot of people that feel shame towards having sex and towards experiencing pleasurable release through that venue. So these are, and then they're huge emotions, and they're very negative, and they really pull you down. So that is why there's the tendency to go right back to the root, because in the root you're just trying to be safe, right? It's all about the safety net that you have available, and that's when you contract and you go back to that, oh my god, I need stability, this fluidity stuff is way too much and I can't handle it. Now, what else can I tell you guys? Okay, another aspect is that when we're talking about pleasure, we're talking about expressing ourselves through that, is that sometimes you can feel like it's a duty, you don't, again, because you're not allowing yourself to experience those emotions. You feel guilty for wanting to experience that, or, you feel shameful towards wanting to experience something, so you just make it like a duty, it's I have to add it on my to-do list, and there are people out there that don't feel natural doing it, and they just see it as another thing I have to do, but they don't allow themselves to really enjoy, all that the act can bring, and this powerful expression, because it is a powerful expression of creativity. Let's see. Okay, one last thing to mention here. So when you have a deficient sacral chakra, you also have sometimes a very overly developed sense or need to control. So controlling people, typically the sacral chakra or the solar plexus are places where they have blockages in them, and that is because, again, you just cannot let things flow, and it's so much about fluidity, and when you're over-controlling, when you want to control every little thing, it's because you're resisting the flow of things. You're not going with the flow, you're going against it. So that's another manifestation of this chakra when it's deficient. If we move on to the excessive side, so if your chakra is overly active, so to speak, what ends up happening is, whereas when it was deficient, you were blocking emotions, now on the excessive bit, it's like there's emotions everywhere, and so you're overly emotional, typical mood swings back and forth, so there's a tendency to be ruled by emotions in this area when this chakra is excessive. And so, there's, again, this idea of being overly emotional, of being stuck in that seat of emotionality so much that, again, you're not letting the energy move up. So you're not going back to the root chakra, which is sometimes what happens when it's deficient, but you're scattering the energy into the sacral chakra by being controlled by it and letting your emotions rule you completely. Let me see, what else do I have here? Okay, another thing that might happen is that there's a tendency to let yourself be influenced by others too much. So it has to do with the fact that your boundaries are not clear. So sometimes not having boundaries, or having having a lack of boundaries is an expression of this chakra being way too excessive, too overactive. And so having clear boundaries is very, very important. Sometimes we let people in when we shouldn't let them in, and a lot of damage can happen to this chakra. There's sexual abuse that can happen when we don't have clear boundaries, when we're reaching out for acceptance, and we haven't really fulfilled, that part of us that is okay with me, and you're going out to reach for the other, that other self that is out there, but you're, you're not really settled into you, and so what ends up happening is by not having these clear boundaries, you might invite people in that can create even further damage, or like I said, there could be other areas like sexual abuse, things like that, that could happen, you know, in relation to this. Another thing, hand in hand, tied with this, is that if you're overactive in your sacral chakra, you know, you can also have like a sexual addiction. So you might be going out too much there, you know, looking for people, not really wanting to establish a connection with them, but you're just looking for that pleasure. You just want that pleasurable release all the time, and there's nothing else. That's all you really want. So there's that need for constant pleasurable stimulation, you know, engaging in relationships. This could also be people that jump from relationship to relationship because they just want to ride that, you know, high that happens in the beginning of the relationship, and then they just kind of lose it, and then they move on. And another thing is overly socializing, partying too much. Those are all different manifestations of when this chakra could be out of balance from an excessive point of view. And I'm going to read you one last thing before I let you go. Let's see here. Okay, so again, the last point about the excessive second chakra is that it says here, the excessive second chakra scatters this liberating energy too soon, so it does not flow through to the higher chakras. So again, we're thinking about fluidity, we're thinking about motion, we're thinking about liberation, creativity, expansion, right? We were talking about expansion yesterday, and if the chakra is excessive, then you're just losing all of that in the center, because you're losing your groundedness, you're losing your center of you, right? So that's what I was mentioning, where because you're not really focused in this center, you go out and you reach for that pleasurable release, and you want to, you know, jump around and experience whatever pleasure that you can experience, but you're losing your own center by doing that. And by center, I'm referring to the sacral center, because there's many. So the last food for thought that I want you to think about today is this last paragraph here. So it says, ideally, we should be able to embrace polarities, feel our emotions, and express ourselves sexually without losing the connection with our own center. And we must be willing to embrace both sides. So again, polarity, we're talking about this, to achieve balance. And it's just by joining these polarities that we're actually, you know, claiming our right to feel, and we're okay with feeling, you know, both from a negative perspective and a positive perspective, because we have that huge range of emotions, and we need to feel comfortable with that, and then not feel like we need to repress it or block it, or you know, avoid pleasure or avoid certain characteristics of emotion, you know, in order to cope with what's happening. So that's it for me. I hope that was enlightening. Don't panic. I know it's a lot of stuff, and as we go through this, I know some of you are kind of starting to self-diagnose and be like, oh my god, I'm experiencing all these things, what do I do? Relax. It's just an overview, and we can all identify with different parts of this. I mean, you know, again, that's why we're going through the journey together. You know, it's a process, you know, and the idea is just to bring awareness to you so that you can understand it better, and you know, have that self-awareness with yourself and some of the, you know, the things that you're dealing with in your life, to be able to recognize them, and again, you know, start having maybe some tools that you can work with in order to, you know, to release some blockages, or have the energy flow more, you know, basically just reharmonize your centers in whatever way that you can. So that's why we're here, just to give you some information, some suggestions, some tips, and of course there's professionals if you want to take it further, but like I said, don't panic, it's just informative, okay? So we'll be seeing you tomorrow. So tomorrow is the tools for balance. So we'll be addressing what can you do if you feel that your chakra is out of balance and you want to reharmonize it. So thank you again for tuning in, guys, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow. Blessings.